Airing first on Asheville FM, WSFM-LP 103.3 in Asheville, North Carolina, this is The Final Straw, a weekly anarchist and anti-authoritarian broadcast and podcast emanating out of occupied Tsalagi land in southern Appalachia. We bring you voices from struggles for liberation from all around the world. Welcome. This week on the show, we share an interview with Sonja, an anti-fascist activist and researcher based in the state of Hessen in Germany, and who is involved in the network known as NSU-Watch. For the hour, we talk about the case of the National Socialist Underground terror group, which killed 9 Turkish, Greek, and Kurdish immigrants in Germany between 2000 and 2006, and who were only discovered in 2011. Sonja tells about the organizing with those who lost their loved ones in the attacks, the uncovering of government knowledge of the networks that produced the NSU, and the milieu and international Nazi scene that it arose from, autonomous anti-fascist research, and other topics. We then speak about the ongoing case of Franco Albrecht, or Franco A., the former German military officer who's presumed to have been planning a false flag attack to draw ire to immigrant communities in Germany, as well as the network of military and police involved in the coordinated Day X plot to overthrow the German state. In some ways, the interview was meant as a corrective to the New York Times podcast Day X, but this one would decenter state agency in terms of resisting fascism. It would challenge the opacity and collusion that the state has with the far right in carrying out that plot, and focus on how we keep ourselves safe. Many thanks to the comrades at Anarchistisches Radio Berlin for their support in researching this topic, and to other comrades in the A Radio network for helping us to get in touch with Sonja. You can find more about NSU-Watch's work at nsuwatch.info/en, or you can follow them on Twitter at NSU-Watch, or the same handle on Instagram. We have a bunch of links in our show notes to some of the resources and groups that Sonja talks about, and a few of the musical tracks that we're going to play throughout this episode. So thanks so much, and hope you enjoy. The Final Straw is a proud member of the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts, and here's a jingle from another member of CZN.
The Anarchist
Radio Berlin.
From across the pond.
So it's the Anarchist Radio Berlin.
With audios in English, Spanish, and German.
And please,
don't mention the war. You can find us at channelzeronetwork.com and aradio-berlin.org.
Would you please introduce yourself with whatever name, gender pronouns, location, political or group affiliations that you'd like the audience to know?
Well, hello, I'm Sonja. I'm a part of NSU-Watch. I will tell you about the organization, what we're doing later. I'm doing anti-fascist politics and research since around about 15 years, and I'm located in a very small town in the middle of Germany, in the state of Hessen.
Thanks a lot for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time to work with me on this conversation. So first up, for the international audience, would you lay out the known circumstances around the NSU that sparked the creation of NSU-Watch?
Yeah, I will gladly. Yeah, thanks for inviting me, I wanted to say as well. So in November 2011, 2 men killed themselves after a bank robbery gone wrong in a small town in eastern Germany. They set it on fire after they shot themselves. And in this RV, a weapon was discovered, a Cesca, that was linked to a series of murders taking place between 2000 and 2006. And at the same time as the RV was set on fire, a flat in another eastern German town was set on fire as well. It was the cover-up flat of the third member of the core group called Beate Zschäpe, who was set on trial afterwards. And after she set the flat on fire, she got undercover and sent out a CD to different addresses all over Germany before she turned herself into the police. And on the CD was a video with a famous cartoon figure of Pink Panther, making fun of all the victims and leading through the murder series. And so this day, the 4th of November of 2011, was at the same time, it was a shock all over Germany, and especially for the victims' families. And also it was a relief because the families, they were told that they were wrong, considering the murder of their family members were racist attacks. So at this day, we found out that there was a neo-Nazi terror cell killing 9 migrants and 1 policewoman for a series of 13 years or something, being active that time. And it was a shock to all of us in the anti-fascist scene, in the anti-racist scene, seeing that what we feared always was right, and having the clarity about that this is possible in Germany.
So NSU, or National Socialist Underground, kind of considered itself in some ways continuing the trajectory of Nazi heritage, I guess, and the same sort of goals as far as we can tell?
Yeah, they did. They were Nazi group that was founded in a big circle of people in East Germany in the 1990s. They were politically socialized in a very racist time. That was shortly after the German reunification. Yeah, it was a very racist time in Germany with a lot of attacks, and also the state being very worried about the losers of the reunification and putting in a lot of money at that time in youth clubs and youth work, which created a safe space for Nazis in Germany, because there wasn't the thinking about institutional racism, structural racism, or racism at all in Germany at that time. And so they put in a lot of money to create a very nice and comforting space for the neo-Nazi youth groups. And that was the time the NSU founded itself. It was also based in the Blood and Honor network, and also very deeply connected to the Hammerskin network, as we found out recently. They were racists who saw themselves in the tradition of other neo-Nazi terror groups like the Order. They read a lot of the common texts in the neo-Nazi scene, like the Turner Diaries or the novel The Hunter. And yeah, being part of the music scene in Germany, the Nazi music scene in Germany, being very deeply based in a nationwide network of Nazi groups.
What I understand is that, so with the reunification, at least East Germany, which was a satellite state of the Soviet Union, had an outward program of denazification of the area that the Soviet Allied government operated in the eastern part of the country. But I've also heard that that there's a lot of xenophobia in that part of the country, and a lot of the Nazi movement maybe had a foothold there. Can you talk a little bit about maybe what the soil was like at that point, and why there was such a rise in neo-Nazism, if it was just international, like the Blood and Honor stuff from the UK, or the, Hammerskins, which started in Texas in the USA. Like if those were that seems like they couldn't have sparked a homegrown neo-Nazi revival in Germany, right?
Well, in the DDR, at the Eastern German states, they had like an anti-fascist understanding of the state itself. So fascism couldn't happen in that state. It was forbidden to happen, so it did not happen. And so, of course, there was a lot of xenophobia, there was a lot of racist attacks, and there were a lot of groups of young people, not very organized, very spread out over the country. We have a term for that. It's called the baseball bat years. Because there was so much street violence in that years. And if we look to Western Germany, there were the organized groups of that time. There was a very structured far-right scene. And when the reunification was done, a lot of the Western German groups went over there and organized the very spread out neo-Nazi scene in Eastern Germany. So it got together very well. And also in Western Germany, in the years after, a lot of a big wave of racism connected to the new nationalism rising up to the reunification. And the state reacted like it always does in Germany. It gives props to the far right. The asylum laws get restricted. People who were affected by the neo-Nazi violence didn't get help. And they try to get the lost souls back in some way. Like they thought the reunification was a very deep economical crisis for most people in Eastern Germany. So they put in their state for taking care of the youth and stuff. It was kind of a pampering for the neo-Nazi movement. It is the same reaction we had in 2015. The far right rises, it protests, it takes marches, and then the politicians, they give props to that and get away rights from the asylum seekers, for example, or the migrants.
So can you tell us a bit about NSU-Watch and what you'll do? What are APABIZ and AIDA, and why do you feel that an autonomous research and recording process without strings tying you to the government is necessary?
A couple of weeks ago, a very famous German anti-fascist and communist, Esther Bejerano, died. She was a Holocaust survivor. She was a member of the music group in Auschwitz, and she put her life to fighting fascism in Germany. And she said, if you want to fight fascism in Germany, if you want to fight neo-Nazis in Germany, you cannot rely on the state. And that is really something we take at heart. I said, like, the 4th of November 2011 was a big shock to all of us, because we have this very old anti-fascist research structures in Germany. Like, I have colleagues doing that for 30 years, 35 years now, collecting every bits and pieces of the neo-Nazi movement, trying to get as much information as possible to do background checks and to put attacks that happen in a background. So when this happened, when the NSU discovered itself, we got to say, because nobody, not the police, not the authorities, discovered them. So when they discovered themselves, it was a big shock for us that all we feared was actually true. Like, if you read the anti-fascist newspapers we put out for decades now, there was always a warning about weapons and about, like, neo-Nazis discussing theorist papers and concepts. So it was a bitter pill to swallow that we were right all this time and that we didn't see it happen, actually. It was also a shock to see how racist we are as anti-fascists, because we didn't listen to the families. The families of the NSU murder cases, they always said it must be neo-Nazis. There can't be any other explanation, because the authorities, they always said, well, there's something about Turkish mafia or Kurdish-Turkish conflicts or something. It must be in their culture. Actually, there was a quote in a police file that said no one of German cultural heritage could do this kind of murder, like this shooting in the face, shooting in the head. This isn't like German at all. So it must be some foreign culture doing that. So, and the families, they were talking about it. They put on rallies to get the public interest. And we didn't really listen to them. We didn't check if the media, they wrote about it as Döner killer, it's kebab killers. And we didn't realize how racist that was. We didn't listen to the families. And so it was a big shock moment for us that changed a lot of our politics. Like, really looking into our own racism, our own focus on looking at the neo-Nazis and not looking at the victims that close. And so it did a big shift for us in our politics. Like, we got to work together with the families. We have to listen to them. They have a lot of information, a lot of knowledge that we need to recognize and that we need to consider. We just can't, as white German anti-fascists, look at other white Germans, the neo-Nazi scene, without considering the racism we all grew up in, that is all part of our society. And so after the discovering of the NSU core trio, we said we need to change something. And this is why we founded NSU-Watch as a network of old anti-fascist structures, of people doing the work for lots and lots of times, to put all the pieces together, because the murders, they took place all over Germany, mostly Western Germany. But there was murders in Munich, in Nuremberg, there was an attack in Cologne, there was a murder in Hamburg, there was a murder in Dortmund, in Kassel, and so on. And so we gathered all the groups, all the local groups, and founded the network so we can get the information together to kind of get to the bottom of all of this, because there was pretty clear at the beginning that it couldn't be just the two dead men and Beate Zschäpe, who was put on trial. There must be a bigger network. And afterwards, there were 5 people on trial besides Beate Zschäpe, but that couldn't be the network as well. But, like, the biggest question of the families is, why did the murders pick my father, my son, my relative? And so in general, it's very clear there was for racist reasons. But in specific, like, who pointed out that internet cafe, that shop, that flower selling stand. And so it was very clear that then there was always a local helping structure for the Nazi terrorists. And so we came together to gather all the informations we have. And we, like I said, we have very old research structures in Germany, and one of them is the Apabitz. It is an archive, an anti-fascist archive, collecting all printings of neo-Nazi scene in Germany. Like, they have a very big collection of all fanzines, of all newspapers, articles, a lot of information gathered from the local groups. Like, the anti-fascist movement, of course, is in Germany organized in autonomous groups all over Germany, collecting all their local informations. And we don't have a central station for putting it somewhere. But in the archives, we have a couple of them, like Apabitz in Berlin and AIDA in Munich. And we have a couple of others. They are the anti-fascist structures to collect the knowledge of the generations of local people doing the research. And so with NSU-Watch, we try to gather all the forces and gather all the informations to deal with that kind of work, because also not only the murders took place all over Germany, also the investigations took place all over Germany. Like, we had different parliamentary inquiries in all the different states. We had one in the Bundestag. We had the trial in Munich. And so with all these different locations of investigation, it was very hard to stay in focus and to get all the puzzle pieces. And, like, for example, in North Rhine-Westphalia, there was a parliamentary inquiry, and they looked very deep into the Combat 18 structure there, but the Bundestag did not, and also the trial in Munich did not. And so we had our people everywhere monitoring the inquiries, monitoring the trial, to get all the puzzle pieces together, because we didn't know when something would make sense, like where to put the puzzle pieces. We still have a bunch of them. We can't connect to anything. And so for me, it's also, there is no bottom line in the NSU complex. It's a topic I will deal with, I think, my whole anti-fascist political life, because we don't know when somebody will talk, when somebody will give up information. And so we don't even get close to the truth in that. And to deal with that kind of perspective and this kind of work, it was necessary to found a network that could, like, make ways shorter to get more connected with all the people all over Germany. And so this is what we did with NSU-Watch.
Just as kind of a side note, it's sad but also really inspiring that that you can lean on these multi-generational centers of research that build from a longer movement memory. I mean, it's sad that people are still having to do this work and have these conversations, but it's pretty amazing that people have put in the work to see this through. It makes me think of things that I've heard about the autonomous movements coming out of the 70s, and having a long memory of like things that their parents or local cops or whatever did during the war era, or before the war or whatever, and recognizing the continuation of a lot of those structures because the same people in a lot of cases had gone about their lives. And I could sort of think of like a parallel here with the anti-imperialist stuff from the 60s and groups like the John Brown Anti-Klan Committee, and how that sort of fed into the start of the fed into the start of anti-racist action and other movements here.
Yeah, it's also a sign of our marginal perspective. Like in the last couple of years, we have academical research about right-wing terrorism, but otherwise in Germany we don't have a collective memory of that. Like we come from a fascist society, we're a post-fascist society. Of course, in the 50s, very directly, there were neo-Nazi terror groups. But in Germany, we just have this memory of left-wing terrorism, of the RAF. And so we always had to collect our own information, to get our own analysis, because there was never a state or society to back us up.
So you mentioned that the folks that went on to form NSU-Watch had realized that they hadn't listened to the voices of the families of the victims of NSU violence about what they thought was really at the heart of the deaths of their loved ones. How does NSU-Watch continue to reflect and engage with the survivors and community members and loved ones of those who were killed by NSU violence?
Most of the families, they founded their own groups, or there were groups founded to support the families in their fight of memory, because this is always something the German state wants to get into. Like they want the remembering of the victims in a polite way, not an angry way, not a political way. And so there are a lot of groups dealing with the struggle around the memory and how to memorize the victims. And we, as NSU-Watch, we do support all the groups, all the families that we can. Something else we did was we worked closely with their attorneys for the trial and gave up all our information we could gather. In the first years, we had very intense meetings looking into every name we found in the complex, looking into every document we could get in our hands. And so we put that all together and gave it to the attorneys of the families to back them up and to give them information besides the state, because the state was never really interested in researching the network around. Well, first thing is that we acknowledge our own racism and that we take it in consideration. We learned that for future cases, like if now a family, if someone is murdered and the family says, well, I think this was a racist attack, we write on there and try to support and try to get good journalists who write the true stories, get in contact with the families and try to support them there. And also we did all this monitoring work, like we monitored every day of the 5-year trial in Munich and wrote a report about every day in the trial. We also translated that to Turkish, and we did that same with some of the parliamentary inquiries. For example, here in the state of Hessen, where I live and where my local NSU-Watch group is, we had this parliamentary inquiry where the family was invited last in the very last session of the inquiry, which was quite offensive at that point. And for them to give them an opportunity to follow what's happening there around the cases of their loved ones, we gathered this information and put it out for the public, also translated in Turkish. And so we see ourselves as one movement now. This is different. Like before, we had this division between anti-fascists and anti-racism activists, and there was always kind of an overlapping, but now we're one movement. We see ourselves as one movement with all the struggles it gets with us, but we're very open to critique around racism, to our own structures. I think that's a very, very good thing coming out of that. And also, yeah, like we had these hard, really difficult racist attacks in 2020, like we had the murders in Hanau, which is very close to my hometown, where a racist shot 9 people. And yeah, there was shown that this new understanding of what anti-fascist research is for and what it's about really works great together, because we could support the families in their struggle and they get the grip on it. Like, they don't stop asking questions. They don't stop putting public pressure on the politicians dealing with that case. And I think that was a hard learning process for us, because before, of course, we thought we were the good ones because we're fighting Nazis. But it was also a very clear process of seeing how much racism is deeply written into our society and what we have to get rid of and what we have to unlearn to make a difference. And I think we're on a good way to that now.
That's really good to hear. Yeah, that's definitely a critique that I hear in the US that seems pretty well founded. Also, that a lot of, like, maybe people that aren't directly or as directly affected by fascist violence jump in to be sort of saviors, but don't listen to the people that are most directly affected, or work with them to create victim-informed ways of organizing. So that's cool.
Yeah, and also, like, we're, as white anti-fascists in Germany, we are also victims of neo-Nazi attacks. Like, if we're not personal, there's always friends of us. Like I talked about these baseball bat years. Yeah. It was against punks and leftists as well as it was against POCs and black people in Germany. And so we came to the conclusion that as victims of neo-Nazi violence, we're not all the same. We don't live the same lives. We don't have the same values, but we're all on force put together in this victim group. Mm-hmm. And we got to deal with that. And we have to support each other in that.
A common experience that a world without Nazis would be better for all of you.
Yeah, all of us, yeah.
So there was a trial that ended in 2018, releasing the living member of the assumed core of the NSU, Schiappa, to Nazi cheers. The case uncovered, among other things, that the group had operated for 13 years all over Germany, as you had said, killing and injuring nearly a dozen people, and that there had been cover-ups by different levels of the German government. To name a couple of these cover-ups, one, the destruction of files by employees of the Federal Office of the Protection of the Constitution, and the witnessing of a 2006 NSU murder by a Hessian police officer for the protection of the Constitution. As a second example, can you talk about the Office for the Protection of the Constitution, something about the state links in the NSU case, and again, to reiterate why it is so important that independent archives are doing this investigation and the state doesn't just watch itself?
During the discovery or our investigations in the NSU complex, we came to the conclusion that the state plays a very big role in all of it. The Secret Service, how did you translate it?
Federal Office of the Protection of the Constitution. What would you call it?
The German word is Verfassungsschutz, which is the quite the wordy translation for that. Mm-hmm. It's a secret service. Okay. Basically, it's the Secret Service for Inner Affairs. So the Department of the Protection of the Constitution, which is called itself, I think it's a very euphoric name they gave themselves. They had the idea that they could control the neo-Nazi movement. And they did that with getting informants at the most high levels in these organizations. For example, a very high member of the Blood and Honor movement in Saxonia was an informant for the state. So their main resource for information about the neo-Nazi scene comes from informants. Neo-Nazis, active neo-Nazis, they were paid for giving up the information. And there's different ways of the neo-Nazi scene in Germany to deal with that. Some do it in secret. Some do it openly to their comrades and say, well, we get the money from the state and we can put it in the movement. We can put it back in the movement. And there were lots and lots of informants undiscovered in the NSU complex. And there were informants very close to the core trio. There were informants involved in getting papers for them to live underground. And we came to the conclusion that the state knew a lot about the weapons in the Nazi scene, a lot about their goals, a lot about their doings. So it wasn't a problem of a lack of information. It is a problem that the Secret Service in Germany collects the information to have it and to keep the idea up that they can control it. The difference is the neo-Nazi scene in Germany, they rather don't want to attack the state itself. They're feeling very close to the state. They want to take over the state. They want to make it more authoritarian. They don't want to abolish the state. So the working process of the Secret Service doesn't really get to the victims of the Nazi scene, because the victims are the others, the migrants, the POCs, the black people in Germany, the leftists, the communists, the disabled people, homeless people, queer people, definitely queer people. And so the Secret Service in Germany is not there to protect the people, but to protect the state. And the German neo-Nazi scene, which is very driven forward by this Day X ideology, we will talk about later, I think. So they never get to the point where they want to attack or abolish the state. They get to the point where they kill all of the people that don't fit in their view of the world. And so we came to the conclusion that there is a very deep problem in the understanding of right-wing terrorism, because right-wing terrorism doesn't want to abolish the state. It wants to create a civil war. It wants to create gaps and widen gaps that are already there in the society. And because there's no collective memory, no collective understanding of right-wing terrorism in Germany, we have this theory, what the politics in extremism are based on. We call it the horseshoe theory. It's like you imagine a horseshoe and you have the left end and the right end, and they're kind of the same and they're kind of the same danger. And in the middle of the horseshoe, you have the good middle of the people. And the idea is that the democracy is threatened by the left and the right-wing extremists, and they have to protect the good middle. This is a theory which comes from the Weimar Republic before the National Socialist state, that the idea was not that the conservatives or the bourgeoisie put in the Nazis into power, but to have this conflict between right and left, and that put the democracy into danger. And this is a theory which also continues until today. So there wasn't a particular understanding of how right-wing terrorism works. There was always a comparison to left-wing terrorism. Like they said, we couldn't know that it was terrorist attack because there weren't any letters, no communiques about it. And so they said, we can see that it was terrorism. And so there was always the necessity for us as anti-fascists to point out what are the basic structures of right-wing terrorism. How does it work? What are its goals? What are its methods? Because we could never rely on that. And so when the NSU discovered itself in 2011, the first thing the Secret Service did was destroy files with information about informants in the direct surrounding of the trio. And it continued, like the parliamentary inquiries, they had problems getting the files from the Secret Service. The trial in Munich, they didn't want to ask questions about the network. They didn't want to know about involvements around. And so it was basically us and a few parliamentarians from the left-wing parties who had interest in getting into it. And it goes further, like the informants in the neo-Nazi scene, they can convict crimes in a certain way and don't get punished in a trial. Because they're informants, they get protection from the state. So they can do like propaganda verdicts, or in light cases of assault, they can do it to still stay in their role as neo-Nazis. So the thinking is to be an informant, you still have to be involved in the movement, and so you have to do what the movement does. And you get protection for doing that if you're an informant. And so there was always the knowledge about it, but we didn't know how many people there were working in the neo-Nazi scene for the government, and also not that they were so high-level neo-Nazis. Like they tried to get all the high-level neo-Nazis working for the state to control the organizations from the top. That was the thinking of the state, or is the thinking of the state until now. Only the state of Thuringia, they cut all this information system, but the rest gets like more budget for it, gets more people doing the jobs. And so the structure, it wasn't really broken. Also now after 10 years, it just works further. And the top story of that all is the one you mentioned about Andreas Temme. He is and he was an employee of the Secret Service. He was not police. He was an employee of the Secret Service. And he was in the internet cafe of Halit Yozgat in Kassel when he was shot. He claims that he wasn't there, that he didn't saw the body lying behind the counter, that he didn't hear the shots. And because it was so unbelievable, there was an English institute, forensic architecture, who rebuilt the internet cafe and tried to get an idea of what he must have been seen, hearing, and smelling, because also, like, if you fire a gun in such a small space, you can also smell the gunpowder. And so they did a recreation of that, but that wasn't that was considered an art piece, not an academic investigation. I put you the link of the investigation in the link list. They made a video out of it. And Andreas Temme, he was in the internet cafe. He claims to be there for personal reasons, for sexting from an anonymous computer, because his wife shouldn't know. But it's like very unlikely. And he had 2 phone calls with his Nazi informant that day, one before and one shortly after. And one was especially long. And he didn't tell the truth, neither in the court trial nor in the parliamentary inquiry in Hessen. And so the truth was never found why he was there. Like if he was there on duty, if the Secret Service got any information, if he was involved with the murders, if he knew someone from a possible local helping structure for the trio or something. Like, he just lied. He just didn't tell the truth. The politicians, they stood behind him at that point. And when Halit was shot, he just left the internet cafe and he didn't respond to the call from the police to get people who saw something or might know something about it. And so the police got to him because he got locked in with his phone there on the computer. He left his work phone number there. And so they found him. And they arrested him, but he was released shortly after because the governor of the state of Hessen said he needs to be protected because he's part of the state. Yeah, and so there's a lot of silence, there's a lot of lies in there, and we didn't get to the truth. After the trial, after the 5 years of trial and 3 years of parliamentary inquiry, we still don't know actually what drove him there, what was his role in the murder of Halit Yozgat.
And none of the surviving members of the NSU have gotten any prison time?
No, Beate Zschäpe, she's in prison. She's
okay.
in prison lifelong. Yeah. The others, they got really light sentences. And also because they were 5 years on trial, they were released the day the verdict came out. Because you get the investigation jail time put on your normal jail time. And so, yeah.
I really started hearing about this case because the New York Times podcast called Day X started telling the story of the case of Franco Albrecht, or Franco A, relating to the NSU and government connections, and finally discussing about a wider conspiracy with members of the German military and police to prepare for, or likely to bring about, the overthrow of Germany's parliamentary democracy, which would be replaced with a military right-wing junta. What's known about the Day X plot and the case of Franco A? And y'all are covering it, right, as NSU-Watch?
Yeah, we do. We sit there on every day of the trial. It's quite interesting because when I listen to the Day X podcast, it's such a wide picture of the whole case. In the trial, it's right now about what kind of money Franco Albrecht got from the government when he was living his secret life as a fake refugee. this is what the trial is about for weeks now. Like sitting in the trial every day, you don't get a sense of what's actually discussed there. It's like boring, very detailed stuff about Franco Albrecht taking money from the German government. And it's hard to stay on focus, not to get bored by all these details. It's very hard. So Franco Albrecht was a very, very strange discovery, actually. And also, the state didn't want to put it on trial. Like, they wanted to do it 2 years ago, I think. And the trial, they just disposed it. They said, no, there's no case in here. And now we have the pressure from the higher court, the statewide court, to put it on trial. And so they did it in Frankfurt. We had this chat groups all over Germany called the cross groups, like Nordkreuz, Südkreuz, like the Northern Cross, the Southern Cross, the Eastern Cross, the Western Cross, this division, these chat groups, which are a quite new phenomenon. But like there's always, when there's new technology available, you take it for organization. It's not such a surprise, actually. Like there's the connection between the military and the far right are very known, especially to the anti-fascist public in Germany. Like we wrote about that often, like years and years, and that like in a lot of military bases, there are Nazi networks. So it wasn't quite news for us. The news was like how far they got along with their planning, and also the question like what does the Secret Service do if they don't look into that kind of stuff? Because this is an area of society where we as anti-fascists, we don't get any information from there. Like if they want to do it in secret, we are not the people going to the military, especially now if you don't have to in Germany. So it was always clear for us that something like this could happen. And it was also clear for us that there's like high-skilled, trained people in the police and the military forces joining right-wing movements, sharing the ideological background. No surprise so far at that point, but we were quite shocked about how the state didn't inform the people who were on the lists, like how the state dealt with that kind of danger, actually. And yeah, also like how unuseful all the different stations of Secret Service are in Germany. Like we have a special Secret Service for the military, and it was quite clear that they're not doing their job for years, because like we know very high level neo-Nazis in Germany who were part of this Secret Service, of the Army Secret Service. They served there, and afterwards, after they quit their jobs, they held speeches at neo-Nazi rallies and gatherings. So it was always clear that there's a deep connection in there. And so it's interesting now that the state kind of wants to bore out the public in the case of Franco A. And it works. It works. It's a very hard struggle to stay on focus there. And also because the same with the NSU case, there's not the one institution to get to the bottom of it. Like you have the court trial, but the court trial is just there to find the guilt of Franco Albrecht himself. It's not about the network. If you get a parliamentary inquiry, they don't have the authority to punish somebody. So we don't have this one institution which can take care of it all. I don't think that this would happen, but the information is very spread out widely, and there's no one to finally make a call and say, okay, this is what happened. This is a network. This is what we're doing. So right now they have Franco Albrecht on trial, but only him, for planning assaults on different people on his lists, for violating weapon laws, and for getting money from the state, living a life as a fake refugee. So this is just his guilt at that point. And now there's different members of the cross groups all over Germany, but it's unclear if they ever get to trial, if they lose their jobs, if they how their career continues, for example.
nicht allein.
This is The Final Straw, and you're listening to our conversation with Sonja, a German anti-fascist researcher affiliated with NSU-Watch, about far-right conspiracies and resisting them in Germany. More at nsUwatch.info/en. And so just because I don't think we've said, you just mentioned what Albrecht had been planning generally. The story is fucking crazy. Like, some German man, I guess he's not like, one of his parents I think was not German, but
he's French, no, Italian. His father is Italian.
Yeah, like he joins the military. He's been writing about a right-wing putsch in the German state as being a good thing for a lot of years, I guess. Like, through his high school, he had written a paper that kind of concerned some people. And so at one point during the quote-unquote refugee crisis period, he ends up darkening his skin and wearing tattered clothing and going into a refugee resettlement office and getting his fingerprints taken and passing off part of his life when he's not on the military base, living in an apartment under this assumed name, and so that his fingerprints are then in the system as the Syrian refugees' fingerprints, so that I guess a few years later or a year later, this janitor in an airport, and I think in Frankfurt, I might be wrong.
Vienna.
Oh, in Vienna? Finds a pistol hidden behind a toilet, and it's got his fingerprints, and the police just lay in wait for whoever to come back and grab the pistol, and they arrest him, but they notice that the fingerprints match the Syrian refugee, and he's like, no, that must be a mistake. I'm a German, like, military person. The apparent false flag that this person is building is, like, kind of ingenious. And also it's crazy to think of what could have happened, considering the way that people around the German-speaking world some people were brought out into the streets and just fully angered against what they considered to be the migrant crisis, with instances like word going around about assaults on German women, because of all of these lagers, filled with immigrants who have come from other places. I don't know, and the rise of the AfD around the same time. Like, it just seems like it's a big story, right?
Yeah, it's a big story, and it's a perverted perspective on what happened in 2015, 2016 in Germany, like this so-called refugee crisis, like people mostly coming from Syria, fleeing the civil war there, fleeing ISIS attacking people. It was a big mobilization moment for the far right in Germany. Like, around the 2010 years, the German far right had an organizational crisis. Like, they didn't get the successes they wanted. And so when 2015 came, they formed a very widespread racist mobilization. We had the AfD in the parliaments at that point, or at most parliaments.
That's Alternative for Germany, yeah?
Alternative for Germany, yeah. It started out as a anti-Euro right-wing populist party and got on a really racist way in a very short time, in, I don't know, 2 years or something. The AfD was founded in 2013, and in 2015 it was the most racist, openly racist party. And the state, they didn't really see the danger in that. So we had a lot of Nazis who weren't organized at that point, because we had this organization crisis where a lot of organizations just fall apart. Some of them just got closer together, like we had a Combat 18 reunion in Germany in 2012, 2013. So some of the groups, they got closer together. Some of them just fall apart. And most of the neo-Nazis who were organized in the organizations falling apart, they were remobilized by these racist mobilizations. We had rallies all over Germany. We had attacks of refugees or POCs in general, Black people in general. It doesn't depend on their status. It depends on their race. So we had this big wave of attacks, this big wave of hate, and at the same time, the AfD in the parliaments and also a lot of the television shows talking or setting a frame for a new kind of racism, open racism in Germany. And so we, at that point in 2015, we saw the rallies, we saw the danger of the rallies, and we saw the attacks, but we didn't know what went on behind the scenes, like in the chat groups, in the military. And so the story of Franco Albrecht is a very, very perverted lens of looking at what happened at that time. And if you look at, like, what does the Secret Service say to the rallies at that point? They say, oh, it's just concerned people and some neo-Nazis trying to undermine them. But actually, it was racism was a new material to get all the different spectrums of neo-Nazism in Germany getting together again. And also the network of racism and sexism at that point. Like we had, like you said, one of the main topics of the mobilization was the safety of white women, of white German women. And the AfD took big part of that. They put a lot of money in media campaigns. Every time a refugee or POC or black man attacked a white woman, they would push it in the public. Like, and widely over Facebook. They put a lot of money in Facebook campaigning. So there was a misunderstanding. Like, we have a big problem with violence against women in Germany, like a big problem, like all over the world. There are feminicides. But the idea was to just put the cases in the center of attention where a POC or a black man was the attacker. And that worked out pretty great. And also, like with Franco Albrecht, or also Stefan Ernst, who was the murder of a politician here in Hessen, in Kassel as well, Walter Lübcke. He was shot in 2019. They both have this telling that the state fall into faults and the brave German man has to protect the country and its women. And this is also part of the Day X telling, like German men have to refine their manhood and get in the role of the protector again.
Yeah, that's a pretty common narrative. And there's so much, without taking away to talk about U.S. context, like so much of what you're talking about just reflects things that I've seen happen in the U.S. over the last couple of decades too. So I guess going back to Germany though, like how does the Day X plot fit into the ecosystem of the far right in Germany today, and like with anti-vaccine and COVID conspiracy myths intermingling with members of AfD and anti-immigration rallies?
Well, the Day X telling is a very old one in Germany. Like, after we are a nation of defeated. After the Second World War, we had this period of occupation, and since the BRD was founded, so the Federal Republic of Germany, there's always the telling in the far right that this kind of state is not the real representative of the Germans. And so there was always the story of how to get Germany back. There's different colorings of that telling. Like, there's Zionist occupied government, like, because parts of Germany were occupied by the Americans. You have a lot of anti-American thinking in the German far right. That doesn't change the fact that they're very deeply connected and do a lot of work together. But there's always been this telling about the Germans don't own their own state anymore since the Second World War. And so in 2015, when Angela Merkel welcomed the refugees, there's this myth about she opening the borders for them. That's not true. There was never breaking a law in that point. There was always the right asylum laws taking place there. So there was this idea of Angela Merkel letting all these refugees in, and we had this telling of the Day X movement in the, I think you would call it more intellectual new right movement. That was called the Great Replacement. So there's a plan for exchanging the people in Germany with refugees. And so there was one moment where a lot of right-wing groups got their mobilization momentum, because they could tell the people, now you see how the government wants to destroy Germans at all. So there's always this thinking that not the right people are in charge, and that the state doesn't represent the real Germans. And there was a new moment for the whole movement. And so the telling of the Day X, of getting to the point of civil war, where the possibility is to take over the state, it was very common always in the far-right storytelling in Germany, but there it got a new momentum. And so a lot of groups, a lot of people got on the streets, got organized in this kind of way. We had like motorcycle brotherhoods or motorcycle-like brotherhoods coming together, making they called it neighborhood watches. And so there was always this thinking about, we have to protect our people from the government, which is in that multicultural great replacement thinking. And so that was the big topic, bringing it all together. After 2015, the German politicians, they cut a lot of asylum laws. They stopped the people from coming to Germany itself, reinforcing the border. Like now, we don't have the attacks on the refugee homes here, because we don't have that many big refugee homes any longer here, because people are dying in the Mediterranean. The government tried to stop people from coming to Germany itself as giving the right-wing movement props, like to stop the worrying about it. And it worked. Like, we don't have that many attacks here because we don't have that many refugees here, but people are still dying in the Mediterranean. And we have this big mass grave now on Europe's borders. And so giving the far right that kind of props at that point, they lost their momentum for the racist mobilization, and they turned it into the anti-vaccination demonstrations. So they found a new topic where the government wants to defeat the German people in their thinking. So we have the same forces, the same people who were pushing forward the racist mobilization, doing now the anti-vaccination protests, but also with a different note. With like, there are a lot of people who think as themselves as alternatives, like people who are into alternative medicine or esoteric or late hippies, for example, who join now the right-wing organizers of that. And that's a very, very dangerous mixture we got there now. And so the Day X movement moved from this great replacement topic to the pandemic topic now, but it's the same people, the same groups doing the mobilization there.
So I guess looking at those Day X plots from the context of the US, there are many comparisons and parallels that could be made between the development of the different far-right movements here and the scene from which the NSU and their contemporaries came out in Germany. In fact, historically, there was a cross-pollination that NSU-Watch notes, such as visits to Germany. I mean, you already mentioned the Turner Diaries and the Hunter being read, or Blood and Honor or Combat 18 from the UK going over. But there's also a member of the US-based White Aryan Resistance and KKK groups from the US that came to visit and showed up during the development of the, in the scene with the three core NSU members. Contemporary examples for groups from the US that parallel developments in Germany might be the Oath Keeper movement, could be compared with the Day X plot, members of law enforcement and military or former, stating that the current government that they serve is in decay and must be reformed to a more traditional and radically conservative style, as well as other groups from white nationalist movements like the NSU, with the now defunct Atomwaffen division, or the base. Do you have any thoughts on the international nature of neo-fascist organizing and what roles those common myths, such as the Great Replacement, which you mentioned, which was it came out of you said the European New Right, but like Nouveau Droit, I guess, if apologies to the French population that might but the new far right coming out of France in the 70s. Can you talk about how this cross-pollination happens, some of the common myths, and what follows from it for international anti-fascist organizing? What do we need to be looking at, and where are some good directions to point energy, or how do we coordinate with each other against some of these common enemies?
Well, the internet, of course, is a big factor in that. Like, it's helping us to get connected like we do right now, but it also helps neo-Nazi groups to get connected. Like, we have this big heroes, they would say, like Anders Breivik, who published his manifesto on the internet, which was an inspiration for an attack in Munich 3 years ago on the same day. Recalling to Anders Breivik, it was the inspiration for the Christchurch attack in New Zealand. It was the inspiration for the attack at the synagogue in Halle 2 years ago. And so we have this opportunity for groups to organize internationally, and also to find background organizations online for that. Like, you don't have to have the camaraderie right at your door. You don't have to meet the people in person. You can connect with them via the internet and exchange about that stuff. But of course, there's also the meeting in person, the important role of worldwide networks and organizations. You mentioned the Ku Klux Klan. We have Ku Klux Klan groups in Germany as well. We always had contacts to the US. Like 2 weeks ago, an anti-fascist network called Exif-Recherche, they published a very detailed paper on the Hammerskins in Germany and their connections to the US, like Wade Page, the murderer of the people in the Sikh temple in Wisconsin. He was visiting Germany a couple of times and also playing with his band. Like, there's the role of music and concerts and Nazi rock concerts and organization for that. Like, there was a lot of exchange of contacts about that music scene and bands visiting. This is also a great connection for Australia and Germany, for example, or for Eastern Europe, like Hungary or the Ukraine or Russia. People coming to Germany with their bands, or to see a band, or to visit a concert. And in this context of the concert, there are always meetings taking place. And the Hammerskin structure, the Hammerskin Nation, is a very big example for that. And also, at the example of the Hammerskin Nation, when the attack in Wisconsin happened, the German Hammerskins went over there right away to meet with the people of the Hammerskin Nation groups in the US to make a plan how to deal with the situation. And also, when the Hammerskins in Portugal were banned, they got help from the other chapters worldwide. So there's always this supporting structure if you have to live underground, if you need weapons, if you need money. There's this big worldwide organization providing that for you. And also getting experiences you can't get in Germany. Like, in Germany, it's legal to shoot a weapon and to own a weapon, but only if you're in a certain kind of organization. And you have to put in a big amount of paperwork for shooting your gun. And so every time German neo-Nazis go to the US, shooting in the wild is a big part of the experience there. And also, like, being violent against other people. It's always a big part of that. And I think these two things, like this highly professional, organized worldwide networks we're seeing, and also the fear of a so-called lone wolf can sit in front of his computer in Germany and gets connected with other people and gets printings for 3D printed weapons and stuff like that. It's a very harsh challenge, I think. But also, what I see is it's a backlash. It's a reaction to emancipative movements all over the world. Like, if we look on queer rights, if we look on the impact of the Black Lives Matter movement all over the world, if we see how decolonization fights are supported from all over the world, they are in fear to lose their position, and they're right to do so. Like, we're on the move. We're doing what we can. But I think it's very hard to don't get lost of the wider perspective. Like, what does capitalism do in these problems we're facing? Like, what are the struggles that make us all the same, no matter where we live in the world? And I think talks like that, like we're having right now, like being interested in struggles of each other, like to learn from each other, is very important, and also not to rely on the state or academia to find the similarities, because like there's capitalism all over it. Like in Germany, the research is so much driven from where to get funded and where to get the next project funded, that it's not about like finding truth or something like that. So I think it's a very important thing to stay connected, to read Twitter news from all over the world, to stay on the pulse of what's going on around the world, and where's a little bit like the struggle we had as anti-fascists in Germany, like where's our role in all that suffering, and what can we do to be to create solidarity with each other.
Does news about this interrelation between Nazis and the security apparatus surprise members of the community impacted by this violence that y'all have spoken with? And I kind of wonder also, just to tack on there, what the wider response in Germany has been from the general population. Like you said at one point that our perspective is a marginal perspective, and also that the German government, at least with the NSU case, did a lot to try to stop it from coming to a wide audience. And it was probably the targeting, like with the Day X stuff, at least the targeting of politicians that actually got the national attention brought on it and forced it to trial, right?
Yet the German state declared that right-wing terrorism is the biggest threat now, but they're not doing anything differently in the structure. They want to like get the police forces more diverse, but they don't want to talk about structural racism at that point. There's so much going on. Like every day we get news about a new police chat group sharing Hitler pictures or jokes about migrants or queer people or black people or Jews. We have a deep problem with institutional racism in Germany, and there's not one step I can see that makes that any different. Like we have this parliamentary inquiries, and like the state is doing its thing, but nothing actually changes. And also you have this shocking news about the Secret Service being involved like that. But what's happening is there's more surveillance, there's more budget for the Secret Service. The Hessian Secret Service here, it doubled its budget from 2011 with Andreas Temme sitting at the murder scene. It's absurd. It's absurd. And so, no, actually, it's no surprise. But for a lot of the families, they were the victims of the NSU. They were all men from the racist murder series. They were all men mostly from Turkish or Kurdish heritage. One was Greek, and they were the ones coming to Germany in the 60s and 70s to rebuild the state, and they always faced racism in a dimension you couldn't imagine, and a dimension that wasn't speakable for them as well. And so when the police came to them and didn't believe them that it was a racist attack and said, well, there's something about drugs, or in one case, the police made up a man who was killed had an affair with. It was the family of Enver Şimşek, and the widow of Enver Şimşek, she was confronted with a picture of the blonde woman with 2 children, and they said, yeah, that's the second wife of your husband, didn't you know? He was trading flowers, and so he went to the Netherlands a couple of times a month to get the flowers, and they said, well, he must be into drug smuggling and stuff like that. So the families, they didn't really have anything in their hands to protect themselves from this kind of institutional racism. And also they didn't have any help because the migrant community being threatened with so much racism all their lives, they turned against the families because they say, well, if the police says it must be some kind of mafia stuff, maybe we keep away from the family. So they were separated from their communities. And they have this second victimization. Like after their family member got shot, they get victimized by the structural racism of the police, of the media, and its effects on the society. And I think from their perspective, they were kind of surprised. And a lot of them, they don't live in Germany any longer. A lot of them went back to Turkey because they couldn't stand living here. Some of them, they picked up the fight. They are part of the movement. They're part of the organization. But a lot of them, they couldn't bear the pain and left the country. And so I think what we learned in the last 10 years, and it's quite unbelievable that it has been 10 years now since the NSU discovered itself. We learned not to trust the state in no case. The question, of course, is how to deal with that kind of threatening without the state, because like the anti-fascist movement, the anti-racist movement, we're not that many people. And most of the German populations, they don't give a shit. They don't give a shit about the victims of right-wing violence because we're the others. We're the communists, we're the queer people, we're the disabled people, we're the homeless people, we're the black people, we're the POCs. And so most of the German society, they just don't give a shit. And this is really harsh to realize. But at the same time, we have this very big movement, this very forceful and strong movement. And also we have a youth that has a language for what is happening to them. Like the victims of the NSU, when they came to Germany, they said that to their children they should assimilate. And now we have a generation of the third generation of, for example, Turkish or Kurdish people coming to Germany who have a language for institutional racism, for pointing that out, for having this kind of conversations. And also the far right, they are taking up like more and more space. Like, for example, the murder of Walter Lübcke. He was a politician of the CDU, which is the Christian Democratic Party in Germany. Angela Merkel is a member of as well. And he was shot on his terrace. And his murder, Stefan Ernst, he said he wanted to bring the terror to the people he thought were responsible for the politics around migrants and the migrant crisis in 2015. So they shot one of them and they don't react to that. This is like really unbelievable. How much silence there is, how much... I'm so wondered why there's not more anger. But at the same time, we have a great movement and an understanding and a language now for doing that. And that keeps us going, I think.
But one thing I didn't think to ask about, but it's sort of occurring to me now, is for all the talk of like neo-Nazis in Germany, we haven't talked about anti-Semitic violence very much. And I know that, yeah, it seems like NSU-Watch came into existence with the realization that like these specific groups of like Kurdish, Turkish, and the one Greek gentleman were being targeted. And so we focus on those specific populations. But to talk about neo-Nazism in Germany without talking about anti-Semitism feels a little strange. One of the people on the kill list, I think, for Franco Albrecht is Jewish and was being targeted, I think, for being Jewish. But I might be wrong about that. But can you talk about...
Yeah, you're right. It's Annette Kahane.
Can you talk a little bit about anti-Semitism in the modern far right in Germany as pertains to the conversation we've been having?
In 2018, we had the attack of the synagogue in Halle. It was on a high Jewish holiday, and the perpetrator, he couldn't get into the synagogue because they have a very good own setup security system. Also, the Jewish communities in Germany, they don't depend on the state as well. After the attack in Halle, they had police protection for some time and now on higher holidays. But also they took care of themselves. Like they had a big wooden door and a very skilled security person at the entrance. And so the perpetrator couldn't make his way into the synagogue. So he shot a queer woman on the street, and then he went on people hunting in the city of Halle. And he went into a kebab shop and killed the owner and attacked another person. So anti-Semitism in Germany is always connected to the far right thinking. It's always one of the motives. And we have like these different kinds of racism, these different kind of racist pictures. like the Jews being the superior, always in control kind of people, and the people coming from other parts of the world are the wild and aggressive and hyper-masculine threat to the Germans. And so in Germany, the far right is still driven by the idea of the Volksgemeinschaft, which is the community in the Third Reich. And this is really based on blood and the country they're living in still. And we still have this thinking of the Third Reich in Germany in so many different levels. Like there was never true anti-fascist movement. And so the struggles were always connected. Also, the anti-fascist movement in Germany is deeply inspired and connected to the survivors of the Holocaust. And there was always this fight together. One of the problems we faced in Germany is that all the leftists were killed in the concentration camps as well. And we only got the Social Democrats who survived the concentration camps. And so there was, after the Second World War, we had a very weak left-wing movement there. And so there are different perspectives of marginalized life coming out of the Third Reich and the Holocaust. And so we always had this thinking of having this one struggle and having to support each other. But it's also a very complicated history because Germany itself, it made itself the world champion of remembering, like getting rid of such a heritage and dealing with such a heritage was a very big political topic in Germany. And so there was always the telling of how Jewish life in Germany is and the reality of Jewish life in Germany. And so this was also and always a very marginal perspective. And anti-Semitism is one of the basic foundations of right-wing thinking in Germany. And it comes in such different shades. And also we have a huge problem with daily anti-Semitism as well as daily racism in Germany. And we're still debating here publicly if we're an immigrant country, no matter where the people are coming from. We still have this very folkish thinking, like there's this group of people living here for thousands of years and we're the real Germans. And that's really hard to get rid of, also in the laws, also like to get a word like Rasse, which is the translation for race, but we don't use it in the daily talking, out of our constitution, for example. It's very hard to really get an emancipative perspective on German politics because there's so much shit going on and very different variations. And the attack in Halle, it remembered us again it remembered all the society about the threat that Jewish people are facing in Germany. And of course, there are anti-Semitic attacks on a daily basis, like restaurants getting attacked, people getting attacked, wearing openly Jewish clothing, for example. And it was always a topic for anti-fascists as well to deal with that. And yeah, like the attack, the perpetrator in Halle who wanted to get into the synagogue to kill people there, Jewish people doing their prayers there, he can switch to a different form of racism if that doesn't work. And so right-wing ideological thinking is always inspired by racism and anti-Semitism in the same kind of way.
Thanks for answering the question that I didn't ask you about before. And also, yeah, you had made references, for instance, to right at the beginning, to the survivor of the Holocaust who had been doing music in Auschwitz and spoke about not relying on the state.
And she is actually a very great example for how the struggle can get together, because she and her daughter, they found a music group with some rappers of Turkish heritage. And one of these rappers was also living on the Kolbstraße in Köln, which was attacked by the NSU with a nail bomb. I think, I don't remember the year actually. But yeah, and they were founding this music group together, doing rap songs and Yiddish songs together, talking in schools, performing at rallies and stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's really awesome.
In the US, one frequently sees the liberal state use real or perceived threats to public safety as an opportunity to increase surveillance and repression of autonomous movements and communities, such as repression of the radical ecological and animal rights movement after prior to the September 11th attacks in the U.S., but the widespread surveillance and attacks on immigrant and particularly Muslim or Muslim-perceived populations after 9/11. Or we develop, I think, pretty insightful fears about further clampdown on Black Lives Matter or anti-fascist movements following the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, which was conducted by far-right extremists. Are there any such fears that you all in Germany see or have concerning the state's response as all of these insights are rolling out about things like the NSU or Day X or Franco Albrecht's case in particular, where the state uses the rising violence that's brought to the public eye coming from the far right as a means of repressing everything in the middle of that horseshoe that you referenced?
Yeah, definitely. Like we had two big laws passing in the last couple of months. One gives the Secret Service the possibility to put on a Trojan on everybody's phone without having a court acknowledge that. So the same Secret Service who is funding the neo-Nazi movement still in Germany and being involved so much and also being involved in the destroying of the evidence can now put on spy app on everybody's phone. We have this big budget increases for the Secret Service as well. And there's always the telling, well, we could have stopped it if we would have more persons doing the job or more budget for doing so. And the opposite is the case. Like we had this in a different direction with the attack linked to the IS in Berlin, the case of Amis Amri, where it's clear that there was an informant directly in the surrounding of the attacker and didn't do shit about it. And there's always, I think, the play with the fear to increase public surveillance. And it's quite ridiculous. Like we have so much neo-Nazi terrorism going on, and it's all like separate people, no networks, no groups, no deeper insight there. And on the other hand, we have very big cases of criminalization of leftist or ecological movement. They're like, for right now, we have a terrorist case here in Germany where a young anti-fascist called Lina, she is in jail for, I don't know, more than half a year now. And they attacked a neo-Nazi. He wasn't hurt that bad. I think they should have hurt his leg or something. So there was just like physical violence on a very low level compared to what neo-Nazis do all over Germany all the time. And she has a terrorist trial now and is in jail for half a year for attacking this well-known neo-Nazi who was also a member of the Atomwaffendivision, by the way, in Germany. Yeah, and so you have, and what is also very concerning is all the stuff going on in the police forces, like also with Nordkreuz, for example, where police officers took a sketch of a house of a person who was threatened. And these sketches were found at the Nordkreuz people. So you have police giving away private information about people and giving it to neo-Nazis. We had the same thing here in the state of Hessen, where an attorney of one of the members of the NSU case, the attorney's name is Seda Basha Yildiz, and she got death threats by email. A lot of people did actually call by a sender called himself NSU 2.0, so directly relating to the NSU case. And she found out that the police in Frankfurt looked up her address, which was, she protected it from public institutions giving it out to people. You can do that if you're a part of a threatened group. You can say my address is secret and only the police can look it up. And so she found out that the information in the email, which included her daughter's kindergarten address, her personal address, and her daughter's name and age. They were given out by the police in Frankfurt. And so we have a lot of this connection directly from the police to neo-Nazi groups or other cases of death threats there. This is a huge problem where there's no actually dealing with that right now. And we have every day we got a case where some police officers get together in Telegram groups or WhatsApp groups sharing racist pictures or right-wing thinking there. And some of them are put on trial, but there's always the saying that, first of all, it's just a joke. Second of all, there's not enough public to get a verdict for that, because in Germany, if you want to do hate speech, you need public for that. And if you just have 5 people in a WhatsApp group, that's not public enough. It's like you can hang a swastika flag in your living room. You can't put it outside your window because there's public. And if you do it in private, it's fine. And so there's not so much punishment for this kind of behavior. And also in Germany, we don't have any outstanding force to investigate police stuff. The police investigates itself. I think it's the same in the US maybe. And so they cover up each other's asses for doing so. And we don't have anything to handle with that, actually.
Well, thank you so much for having this conversation, for all of the details that you've brought, and I really appreciate the work that you all are doing. How can listeners find out more about NSU-Watch and support you in this work and get involved even?
So we are on social media. We do have an Instagram and a Twitter account. I sent you the addresses so you can pull it up. We also have a very good English website where you can get information about the work we're doing. Actually, one big help, if somebody of you out there can speak German properly, is to help translate the texts anti-fascists put out. Especially, I mentioned the big research paper from Exif Recherche. It's talking a lot about the US, but they didn't have because they all do it in their free time and not paid. They didn't have the power to translate it. So if you're open to that, offering help for translation, that would be awesome. Yeah, and otherwise, just help us push this. That's a big help, actually.
A lot of solidarity to you, and thanks for having this conversation. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for being interested.
That was our conversation with Sonja, who affiliates with a Hessen branch of NSU-Watch, based out of Germany, which is an autonomous anti-fascist research network that works with victims of anti-immigrant Nazi violence in Germany. More on their work can be found at nsуватch.info/en, and check our show notes for links. Big thanks to the people that have been supporting us economically. Just a reminder, you can find out more about how to do that with one-time or recurring donations or merch purchases. We're on the Patreon, Venmo, Liberapay, and a few other platforms. You can find out more at tfsr.wtf/donate. And you can also support us by following us on social media and sharing our material. You can find links to our streaming platforms as well as social media at tfsr.wtf/links. If you're in an area where there's a community radio station that you'd love to hear us on, you can find out more about that process or get in touch with us. There's more up at tfsr.wtf/radio. And the funds that we receive go towards paying for the platforms that we're on, as well as paying for the ongoing transcription of our episodes. So big thanks to everyone. We've been going for 8 months now, where every episode has been transcribed, plus some older ones. And it's really fantastic. It's getting into prisoners. It's translated. Just a note on that. I just got word that A Radio Berlin was able to do a German translation of our interview with comrades from the Federation of Anarchism era, based out of mostly Afghanistan and Iran, about their perspectives. So now there's an audio and written German version of that for more audiences to hear. Probably the best way that you can support us, besides rating us on iTunes and crap like that, would be just to tell folks about the show, or reach out to us if you have show ideas, or if you'd like to be on the show. Honestly, algorithms and social media and all that toxic shit aside, our face-to-face relationships are the most important thing that we have, and the most revolutionary tool that we have. This is The Final Straw, and I'm Bursa Gunness. The show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions and suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net or thefinalstrawradio@protonmail.com. If you'd like to use any episode for your project or radio show, feel free to do so. Just send us an email to let us know. If you care to, you can send us letters at The Final Straw Radio, P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina, 28816. This show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned co-op in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a catalog of Firestorm's books and zines, plus a full calendar of events up at their website, firestorm.coop.